Hello everyone and good morning. I am happy to be with you today and I thank you for this invitation to deliver this session on the importance of prayer for our well-being. By way of introducing myself, I am Maria Theresa Portelli and I live in Malta, which is an island in the Mediterranean Sea. I am a journalist by profession and work with a volunteer organization that strives to alleviate poverty and promote human development and social justice by witnessing to the Christian faith and gospel values. I also worked in journalism and public relations for a good number of years. Qualified in spirituality and spiritual direction since 2010, I volunteer in the Ministry of Christian Spiritual Guidance by offering one-to-one spiritual accompaniment and the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola in daily life. I have been involved for the last 10 years in leading retreats in the Ignatian tradition. And that was something about myself. Now I start off with the experience of a couple and how prayer helped the wife to go through her husband's illness. This experience was reported on CNN's website. Her name is Carol Cochon, who prayed during her husband's 42-day hospitalization for COVID-19. Her husband, Rob Cochon, had been feeling sick and developing shortness of breath for about 4 days when he was admitted to a Florida hospital on Tuesday, 17th March. He was diagnosed with double pneumonia. The next day, a coronavirus test came back positive. During Rob's stay, Carol says that she felt alone, sad, concerned, and feared the unknown. As a faithful Christian for more than 40 years, she turned to praying to God and meditating upon Bible verses. And she said this while recounting her experience. I think that prayer probably encouraged me. It calmed me at moments. I think it centered me back again and reminded me that I am not in charge. Carol prayed alone and with family. The goal wasn't to change God's mind, Carol said, but to see that God was in control of this before it happened. She said, I really felt the peace of God telling me that I wasn't even supposed to worry about that. So I did not worry. I'm usually a planner, but I knew that God had a plan. Carol and Rob credited prayer as one of the factors that led to his recovery. And this is a real experience where we could see how prayer helped in the well-being of both Carol and Rob, despite all that they went through. And today we are going to focus on this theme of prayer and well-being, which is especially topical for this particular time that we are living in. First of all, I would like to refer to research that was carried out on this subject of prayer and well-being, and how these are interlinked. It is known, in fact, that prayer can lead to concrete results in mental health improvement and stress reduction. Prayer generates optimism, enriches interpersonal relationships and the quality of life. It allows us to connect to something greater than ourselves, to God, and enables us to release control. And it is known that all of these result in improved health. A licensed psychologist, Mahlet and Dale, has witnessed firsthand the benefits of religion and prayer or meditation on one's mental health. As a doctoral student, Anday spent 3 weeks in Sri Lanka after the 2004 tsunami. Speaking of this experience, she said these words: "People had very different reactions to the tragedy. Some people were drawn closer to religion and their faith, whereas for some people it really tested their faith. While everyone's faith journey is different, Dale was convinced that religious and meditative practices have a positive impact on one's sense of well-being. She notes that regardless of religion, faith, or belief, researchers have noted countless benefits of prayer. Another researcher, Dr. Wayne Jonas, found that among all forms of complementary medicine, prayer is the single most widely practiced healing modality. And I also would like to quote for you another researcher, Harold Koenig, who notes this: "A large volume of research shows that people who are more religious or spiritual have better mental health and adapt more quickly to health problems compared to those who are less religious or spiritual. These possible benefits to mental health and well-being have psychological consequences that impact physical health, affect the risk or disease, and influence response to treatment." We go through many stressful periods. In these circumstances, prayer can be a way of sharing the burden that stress has placed upon us. The requirements are simple. All we need is belief in God and faith that God is looking out for us, that He is seeking us. And prayer provides us with stress relief in a variety of ways. When we express a prayer for help, for example, this is a great source of comfort and relief for us because we do not feel we have to bear our burden alone. Often we are hurt or confused. We can feel as if there is no one to talk to or depend on. But a prayer during these tense times relieves that feeling of loneliness. The belief that God is listening to our prayers and that He will help us is a source of hope to many for us. We will see later that during this presentation that expressing gratitude and giving thanks through prayer reminds us of the positive aspects of our existence and can help ward off feelings of sadness. So I highly recommend that we try and make time for prayer every day, to include it in our timetable for the day. We start with only a few minutes that we spend with ourselves and with God. But these few minutes prove to be beneficial not only to grow spiritually, but prayer gives us rest and peace. That peace that we so need. We carry this chapel within us, a sacred space, and we can call on God any moment. I can stop frequently throughout my day to talk to God. Just a sentence, which I can say to Him. But with this only one sentence, I acknowledge that God is within me. I realize that I can pray anywhere and at any time. This is the spiritual practice of what I call holy pause. This holy pause doesn't have to take a lot of time. Even 1 minute will do it. Pausing to consider an ordinary moment as prayer. It is a way of bringing God into our daily life. And when we are in tune with God, we cannot help but experience deep well-being. I would like to focus this presentation on 4 ingredients essential for our prayer life and well-being. I am not going to exhaust all the ingredients that contribute to our prayer life and well-being, but I chose to focus on these 4 because I would like to highly recommend them to you. And these 4 ingredients of this recipe of prayer and well-being are silence, mindfulness, forgiveness, and gratitude. And I am going to have a look at them one by one. I start with silence. Some of us welcome silence. They know that they need it, and they need space every day for some silence. For others, the thought of sitting in silence is enough to make their skin crawl. But silence offers us opportunities for self-reflection. It gives us time to turn down the inner noise and increase awareness of what matters most. And it cultivates mindfulness, on which I am going to talk as well. Mindfulness, which is the recognition and appreciation of the present moment. It is also known that silence also has physical benefits and helps our well-being. We have to learn to listen to silence. This is a learning experience, in fact, to experience silence in our everyday noise, in the hustle and bustle. We have to look for it. Let it become the language of our hearts, not a strange other tongue, but as natural to us as any speech. It is like the very breath of God. We remain in silence, become conscious of the presence of God, and this in itself is a form of prayer. We have so many thoughts, such a busy mind, but silence cleans our awareness. Silence calls us into the heart, inside our hearts. It is there that we begin to see the world as it is. So much beauty, so much light, and so much grace. When silence becomes our friend, when we befriend it, the quiet carries us deeply within, and the peace beyond words unfolds, and we find our God within, awaiting us, the God who is waiting for us in this silence. I would like to share with you these words from Mary Oliver's poem on prayer that sum up the stillness of this time that we are living in, and the opportunity it gives us to reflect and pay attention to Christ's presence in our life. Just pay attention, then patch a few words together, and don't try to make them elaborate. This isn't a contest, but a doorway into thanks and the silence in which another voice may speak. It is especially important in these challenging times to take time for stillness. When the voice of our own anxiety and vulnerability is loud, it can be helpful to remember that there is no contest, and that discovering a doorway into thanks and silence can refresh us, restore us, and rebalance us. So I encourage you, to find room for silence in your day. And silence leads you to prayer, to lift your heart to God, to be mindful to Him. And this leads us to the second ingredient that I would like to share with you, which is mindfulness. Mindfulness is often associated with the tradition of Buddhism. There is a famous monk who is known for teaching the word mindfulness, who is Thich Nhat Hanh. Mindfulness invites us to see the world as it is, without judgment. It enables us to step off the treadmill of the past and engage fully with the present. In his latest book, How to Connect, this famous monk that I referred you to, Thich Nhat Hanh, defines mindfulness as a healing balm that can put an end to our sense of alienation. It is a non-judgmental awareness of whatever is happening inside us and around us. Mindfulness is the miracle which can call back in a flash our dispersed mind and restore it to wholeness so that we can live each minute of life. So mindfulness helps our mental well-being. And we can learn how to practice mindfulness in our prayer when we try to see God in our present moment. Within that now, we try and find God. We learn how to recognize the holy in the ordinary things and praise God in that ordinary. Look for God breaking into our lives, and this is grace. I refer you to the Jewish scriptures, where there is a famous incident where Moses asks to see God's face. God answers that this is impossible, because nobody can see God's face and live. When Moses persists in his demand, God offers a compromise. God tells Moses that he will place him in a cleft in the rocks, put his hand over Moses' face, and then pass by, so that Moses will get to see God's back and not God's face. This can help explain why we so often think that God is absent in our lives. Generally, we struggle to see God in the here and now. In the present, God often seems absent. Yet, when we turn around and look back in our lives, we more easily see how God has been there all along and how we have walked in His divine presence, protection, guidance, and care that we couldn't see at the time, but are clear in retrospect. We see God's back more than we see God's face. And this requires wisdom. Wisdom is the gift of being able to recognize the presence of God in the midst of our daily lives, however uncertain or messy they may be. And I ask you today to reflect on this question. How does the Lord's presence touch you in your daily life? How does the Lord's presence touch you in your daily life? And spend some moments today to reflect on this question. According to Saint Ignatius of Loyola, we have to learn to be contemplatives in action, that we not only contemplate the active world and the wonderful things around us, but also see in these wonderful things the signs of God's presence and activity. The contemplative in action is deeply aware of God's presence, even in the midst of a busy life. This is the awareness of God. This leads us to finding God in all things. And how can I be so mindful of God's presence in my everyday life? What can help me? I can use my smartphone, for example, to remind me every hour to pray. I set a reminder on my smartphone for that pause, which I have mentioned earlier. This could be the most helpful in creating this mindfulness. The result is a constant reminder of God's presence. Mindfulness of God is in fact praying without ceasing, as St. Paul says to us. We will come to learn that everything is holy, because our days hold a multitude of ways God can break in and power us back to Him as we ponder, pray, and consider. And now I pass on to the third ingredient essential for a prayer and well-being, which is a challenging one: forgiveness. True forgiveness can be complicated because the pain of betrayal, loss, deception, and personal attack clings tightly. We may intend to forgive, yet become stuck in our own mixed motions and motives, the silence of others, or anger, and the skewed stories we believe and tell about our lives. Forgiveness is hard, but with Jesus at our side, forgiveness and even reconciliation awaits. Forgiveness has always had a place in spiritual teachings, but now there is a scientific evidence that supports the claim that forgiveness can actually help increase mental and physical well-being. As you know, forgiveness is the main theme in the teaching of Jesus. Be merciful as your heavenly Father is merciful, he says. And when Peter asks how often he has to forgive the same offense, Jesus answered 70 times, 7 times. Jesus' lived example of forgiveness also stands out, especially his forgiveness from the cross. But I ask, how can we better manage this difficult part of loving? There is no way to make it easy, but I would like to share with you some ideas that might help. First of all, we need to ask God's assistance. We have to ask God repeatedly to do for us what we cannot do for ourselves, to take away our heart of stone and give us a heart of flesh, to give us the grace of forgiveness, because forgiveness is a grace which only He can give us. We have to acknowledge that we are sinners too. We have hurt other people, and if we are aware of this helps us accept other people with their sinfulness too. Seeing the persons who hurt us in their own context puts matters in a new light. We may ask, what was their background? What was going on in their lives when the offense happened? We can understand why they did what they did. And when we understand, it is easier to forgive. And forgiveness is much easier if the other person apologizes. It is hardest when the other person does not seem to be aware of any wrongdoing. And forgiveness is not always the proper response. Take wife beating, for example. A woman has to insist on change in case like this, or remove herself from the situation. The famous words, forgive and forget. This is not the best statement of the goal. We do do not usually forget what really hurt us or cost us a lot. Forgiving does not mean forgetting. What it does mean is that we let go of the offense so that we no longer use it as a reason for distance. I would like to refer you to the book The Check. There is a movie of it too, which has a very powerful episode on forgiveness. The story of this book revolves around Mackenzie's youngest daughter, Missy, who has been abducted during a family vacation. And evidence shows that she may have been brutally murdered in an abandoned shack deep in the Oregon wilderness. 4 years later, Mac, her daddy, receives a suspicious note, apparently from God, inviting him back to that shack for a weekend. And it is during this weekend that God, in the book named Papa, led him to forgive the kidnapper. I'm going to read for you extracts from the conversation that Mac had with Papa, God the Father, about this forgiveness. Mac was clear about the kidnapper. I know it isn't right, but I want him to hurt like he hurt me. I can't just forget what he did, can I? Papa responds, forgiveness is not about forgetting, Mac. It is about letting go of another person's throat. Forgiveness does not establish relationship. Unless people speak the truth about what they had done and change their minds and behavior, a relationship of trust is not possible. And there was a process, like a journey, in which Mac was led by God to experience this forgiveness for his daughter's kidnapper. And after he made the decision to forgiveness, Mac asked God, so is it alright if I'm still angry? Papa was quick to respond, absolutely. What he did was terrible. It was wrong, and anger is the right response to something that is wrong. But don't let the anger and pain and loss you feel prevent you from forgiving him and removing your hands from around his neck. Son, you may have to declare your forgiveness 100 times the first day and the second day, but the third day will be less, and each day after, until one day you will realize that you have forgiven completely. And then one day you will pray for his wholeness and give him over to me so that my love will burn from his life every vestige of corruption. As incomprehensible as it sounds at this moment, you may well know this man in a different context one day. It is a very powerful experience of forgiveness and good counsel from God the Father, who gently led this man to forgiveness. A prayer exercise that can help us when forgiveness is difficult is to imagine the scene in which we were hurt, and then imagine Jesus on the cross extending forgiveness to his enemies, and to move back and forth several times between the two scenes, asking for Jesus' spirit of forgiveness. As I already said, forgiveness is a grace that only God can give us, and we have to pray for it. Now, the last ingredient that I'm going to share with you today, gratitude. Gratitude is strongly associated with greater happiness. It helps people feel more positive emotions, relish good experiences, improve their health, deal with adversity, and build strong relationships. I quote a spiritualist, Stephen Levine, who has described gratitude as a way of seeing and being. Leading gratitude researcher Robert Emmons, calls gratitude an antidote to negative emotions, such as fear and anxiety, that can help us positively cope with life and life's disappointments. Approaching life with an attitude of thanks be to all things can be mentally, emotionally, and spiritually challenging, but doable. Gratefulness opens a joyful way to find God in everything, and this is why I recommend to you to incorporate gratitude in your prayer. When we are grateful, focus shifts from ourselves to God. And I ask, does it matter to God that we are grateful? Recall the story of Jesus healing the 10 lepers, and only one, a Samaritan, came back to thank him. Jesus said on this occasion, "Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" And apparently it matters to Jesus. God delights in our gratitude. Jesuit Father Peter van Bremen encourages us to recognize the giver in the gifts that we have. The giver, God, who is in that gift. Having a grateful heart is also a learning opportunity, because we have the tendency to take things for granted. Father Peter van Bremen, in his book Let All God's Glory Through, suggests for us to buy a little notebook and each evening write 3 concrete things of the past day for which we are grateful. This notebook will turn out to be a great help, especially on dark days. Brother David Steindl-Rast, who is famous for his books and talks on gratitude, mentions that for years he has written in his pocket calendar each day at least one new thing for which he has not yet been grateful. Perhaps someone fears it might be difficult each day to find a new motive for gratefulness, but from his own experience, Brother David tells us that it is not. On the contrary, often 4 or 5 motives present themselves. He says, in fact, "I cannot imagine how old I must become before I noticeably exhaust the stock." I end my thoughts on gratitude with this quote by James E. Faust. "A grateful heart is a beginning of gratefulness. It is an expression of humility. It is a foundation for the development of such virtues as prayer, faith, courage, contentment, happiness, love, and well-being." As I said before, these 4 ingredients do not exhaust all the ingredients that make up our prayer and well-being. However, I presented these 4 because I felt that they are the most essential and helpful both for our prayer as well as for our well-being. You could add up more ingredients yourself to continue making up this recipe into a more wonderful experience for your life. And now I would like to introduce you to a method of prayer suggested by St. Ignatius of Loyola, known as the Consciousness Examen. This prayer incorporates in it all the 4 ingredients that I have presented to you: silence, mindfulness, forgiveness, and gratefulness. St. Ignatius believed that we can find God in all things at every moment, even in the most of ordinary times, as I have shared with you before. And to do this, we must take time to reflect on our experience, to look at the day that is gone and discern its meaning for us. We can use the examine prayer either at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day. Prayer at the beginning of the day, as we know, sets the tone for a spiritual day and fills us with strength to face the day's challenges. Prayer at the end of the day, on the other hand, helps us to acknowledge the presence of God throughout the day, allows us to give thanks for the help God provided during the day, and provides us with an opportunity to ask for help with any ongoing situations. This examine prayer takes us only 10 to 15 minutes. It won't take us long. We imagine that Jesus is watching a film with us of the last 24 hours, slowly fast-forwarding through the scenes as we look for examples of when we sensed God's presence. And we pause on those scenes and we reflect on them. This prayer of awareness of God in our lives is broken down into 5 steps. Do not feel that you need to do all the 5 steps and use a precise formula of words. This is not about completing a task, but about building a relationship with God. And I would like to have a look at these 5 simple steps of the examine prayer. The first one is to ask God for light. I want to look at my day with God's eyes, not merely my own. The second step is to give thanks. The day I have just lived is a gift from God, so be grateful for it. The third step is review the day. I carefully look back on the day just completed, being guided by the Holy Spirit. The fourth step is to face your shortcomings. I face up to what is wrong in my life and in me. And the last step, the fifth one, is to look toward the day to come. I ask where I need God in the day to come. Now I would like to invite you to try and do this prayer together. Since we are doing it during the day, we will look at yesterday. If you choose to do it in the evening, look at the day that has just passed. Now, I invite you to find a comfortable position where you are sitting so that we can pray this prayer together. And be aware that you are in God's hands, you are in God's presence as you focus on your breath. Breathing in, breathing out. Breathing in and breathing out. Here in His presence. If you wish, you can close your eyes. Be silent, be still, alone, empty, before your God. Say nothing at this time and ask nothing. Be silent, be still. Let your God look upon you. That is all. God knows. God understands. God loves you with an enormous love. God only wants to look upon you with gracious love. Be quiet. Still. Be. Let your God love you. Ask God to reveal to you all the gifts and graces He has given you yesterday. From the really big ones, your life, safety, love, to the really small ones, a good night's sleep, an affirming phone call from a friend, a task completed, a compliment paid to you. And for each gift that comes to mind, spend a moment giving thanks and praise. Knowing that you need God's help to see your darker side realistically, but from the perspective of God's merciful love, ask God to fill you with His Spirit. Ask God to be the leader of this prayer time. And going hour by hour, review your day. Review yesterday in this case. And in your imagination, relive each significant moment of your day. Linger at the important moments and pass quickly through the less relevant ones. As you are reviewing your day, continue to thank God for all the gifts that you find in it. But now, pause at any of the difficult moments of the day, when you had a bad thought, said something you shouldn't have, or did something inappropriate. Also, pay attention to any missed opportunities, such as when you could have acted in a more Christian manner, but you didn't. When you find moments in which you are not fully the person you're called to be, stop and ask forgiveness from God. and try to sense His healing mercy washing over you, making you clean and whole. With what you have learned during this prayer time about yourself and your life, ask God to show you concretely how He wants you to respond, or what He wants you to do today. Ask God to show you what kind of person God is calling you to be. Ask God for the help to be the person you're called to be. Now we come to an end to this prayer. As you return to the room where you are, we end with the prayer, Our Father. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. I encourage you to practice this examen in your prayer. And I would like to introduce you to two books which I recommend to you on this examen prayer and which you may find helpful to pray this prayer. The first one is A Simple Life-Changing Prayer, Discovering the Power of St. Ignatius Loyola's Examen. It is by Jim Manning. And this one is Reimagining the Ignatian Examen by Mark Thibodeau. And this book includes different forms of examen that are applicable to our daily lives. There are different forms of the examen prayer. Now I would like to end with this famous quote of Saint Augustine, which I think it sums up all that I have shared with you today, that prayer and turning to God gives us rest for our mind, body and soul. You have made us for yourself, Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. And if you have any questions or would like to comment on what I shared with you, or would like to share something else with me, I invite you to contact me, to be in touch with me, and I would like to give you my email address, which is letsjourneysite@gmail.com. I would be very happy to answer you and to listen to what your sharing is. And I also have a blog which you can follow, where I post meditations and prayers which can be freely used for your prayer time. And also, if you lead a group and would like to use them with your group, you are free to do so. It is letsjourneysite.wordpress.com. And I thank you once again for this invitation to speak to you. It was wonderful for me to join you in this way and to prepare for this presentation. May God bless you all, and goodbye.